Now we need to epoxy the T-nut in place, but the T-nut has smooth sides, so they must be roughed up for the epoxy to hold it well. Here I'm just using a small file to make some rough edges and small grooves. I will use JB Weld epoxy because it is strong and easy to use in small portions. I am also using a long set time instead of fast cure epoxy, so I have more time to work with it. Old sandpaper works well as a mixing platform, along with a small piece of scrap wood to stir it up with. Just squeeze out 2 equal lengths of the epoxy and mix together. Now apply a semi-thin coat of the epoxy to where the base of the T-nut will rest. And a small amount on the edges of the hole. Then tap in with a mallet. If it does not seat all the way down, just use a punch or small piece of wood to set it firmly in place. Now it is time to apply the rubber washer to the base of the pad. To help the epoxy hold better to the surfaces, rough up the wood pad with 80 grit sandpaper. Then rough up one side of the rubber washer. You can see where the washer is smooth on one side and now rough on the other side. Apply a semi-thin coat of epoxy to the rough side and ensure it is all the way to the edges. Just set in place and lightly press down. I put just a small amount of weight on it while it dries overnight. Here is the pad with the epoxy thoroughly dried. At this point, it is ready to use. You don't have to do this next step of adding a taper to the pad, but I thought I would add it in case you wanted to try it. The taper I selected will be 15 degrees. But I want to make a simple jig for my sander to make this taper. Here I am setting a machinist protractor to the angle I chose. Set the table saw blade to the angle. Now set the fence to the thickness to cut the taper into the wood. And then adjust the blade height to a little taller than the pad. Now I have a platform to rest the pad on while making the taper. I clamped the taper jig to the sanding table. I could just set the table to the angle I wanted, but I would prefer to keep my table at 90 degrees. I also clamp an edge piece to help hold the pad while sanding. Just like sanding it before, I will use light pressure and sand the taper to the edge of the rubber washer. Now it is time to assemble the toggle clamps. I'm careful to not tighten them much, since these are not intended to stay on permanently, nor do I want to risk pulling out the T-nuts. Now to test them out. I first set the proper height for the threaded rods and clamp in place. These hold very well and everything is stable. The last step is to apply a coat of wax or varnish to keep out the bad stuff and seal in the goodness. I'm sure there are many other ways to do this, but this is what I came up with that I thought was reliable and relatively inexpensive. Another great benefit of making your own clamp pads is that you can custom make them to conform to odd-shaped items.